So this video is all about how to use the tools in Photoshop. So I have a photo open here of this duck, and I'm going to use the tools to change a few things about it. So first, before you get started with using the tools in Photoshop, you want to make sure you have your workspace set up so that it's the most efficient for what we're going to be using throughout this semester. So you should have your tools on the left. It's this long panel here that has all these different icons of tools. You should have your adjustments window over here, your layers window, and then one that pops out, that's the history window. So some of these we'll use on later projects, but pretty much that is all we're going to need as far as the windows in Photoshop. So if you need to change that up at all, get rid of some things, make sure to do so before you start editing. There is a video as well for setting up your workspace, so if you haven't done that yet, make sure to watch that video. But I have my workspace set up and I have a photo open and I am ready to start editing this one. So one thing to note about having your photo different sizes, sometimes when it first opens it's kind of zoomed out a little bit like this, but you can use the magnifying glass tool, the very bottom thing here in all the tool icons, and that can zoom in. You can click up at the top the zoom out button and it will zoom out. But what's a lot quicker than going back and forth between these different buttons is no matter what tool you have selected, you can always hold down Command on a Mac or Control on a Windows computer or Chromebook, and you hold down that button depending on what computer you're using, and you press plus for zooming in, or Command or Control minus to zoom out. So that will help you with any kind of detailed areas in any particular area to edit anything. But I like to have my image full screen so I can see everything that's going on at one time. And in order to do that, if you have it super zoomed out or super zoomed in and you want it to just lock to full screen, you can hold Command or Control 0. And that will just put it right to full screen so you can see everything in the image. So I have my image ready to go, I have my workspace ready to go, and now I'm going to use some tools. So the very top one here is the Move tool. For right now, pretty much all we are going to use that for is adding text and moving that text around. But if you hover over any of these, they show you a little preview of how they work. And it also shows you in parentheses here a letter. And that letter means that if you type that on the keyboard when you have another tool selected, and so the Move tool up at the top here was V, so if I have this other tool down here open, and I want to jump to that other tool right there without going over to my cursor and clicking on it, I can just push V on the keyboard and that will jump to that tool. We'll use things like the lasso tool later on. Those are for selecting different things. But what you can use for this project is the crop tool is one of them. So the crop tool works where you select the tool and then you can click, hold, and drag wherever you want the crop to be. So when you let go, it looks something like this. You can adjust the edges. Up at the top, you can set a specific ratio. So if you're ever going to print out a photo at any point and you need it to fit a specific size frame, you can select things like 5x7 or 4x5, which is also an 8x10, just depending on what size you need. But if you want it locked to a specific ratio, you can select one of those, or you can type in specific numbers. So right now we have a 5x7, but I don't exactly want this to be a vertical image. So it's 5 horizontally, 7 vertically. So I can click these little arrows right here and it switches them. So then I can change the size of it, but it locks it at that ratio. So it won't end up being a square, it won't end up being really long one direction and not the other direction. It will stay at that ratio. So let's say I want to put it right about here. That's where I want to crop it. So now I can click the checkbox here to confirm that's how I want it cropped. If you select this cancel button here, you can go back and not crop it. But you have to select one of these buttons in order to move on with anything else. So that's where I want it cropped. So I'm going to click the checkbox here. And so now it's cropped. Another tool you can use is the spot healing brush. So a lot of these tools are brushes, and the spot healing tool is one of those. And anytime you use a tool that has a brush, that up here you can change a few things about. So you can change the size, which is just how big the brush is, all the way up. It's really big, but we don't need it quite that big. And so you can change the size anywhere along this little slider here, but you can also use the keyboard shortcuts for changing the size, which are the bracket keys on the keyboard. And the bracket keys are the keys next to, it's just to the right of the letter P on the keyboard. They're the ones that look like parentheses, but kind of boxy. So the one on the right will make the brush bigger, and the bracket on the left, the one right next to the letter P on the keyboard, will make the brush smaller. So that way you don't have to keep clicking up here, adjusting the size, see what it looks like, adjust the size again, and go back and forth. You can just make, oops. You can just make it bigger, or you can make it smaller with those bracket keys. So for this photo, I want to remove some bird poo on the dock here. So I'm going to make it about that size. And this type of spot healing brush tool, you can use a couple different ways. If there's just one little speck somewhere, you can just click it on it and remove that. But if it's a bigger area like this, you can click and hold and drag it over what it is you want to remove. And then what Photoshop does is it calculates all of what's around it and it fills it in. So sometimes if it's a really busy image, it might copy random things from around it and it might not be exactly how you want. So it's a tool that you need to play around with a little bit depending on what photo you're editing. But usually if it's surrounded by something that isn't so busy, it will just completely remove it. There's also the brush tool, which is a paintbrush, and that you can change the size of the brackets as well. Or up here, all brush tools also have a hardness, and so the hardness means if it's at 0% and you just paint a dot with the brush, it will be really fuzzy. It'll be very gradual when you're painting about. But if you change it so that the hardness is all the way at 100%, it will be just a line or a circle with a really hard edge. So it won't have that fuzzy, gradual effect to the edge of it. So that is the brush tool. We also have the sharpening and blurring tools. So this is one example of some of the tools that are kind of hidden beneath each other. So the sharpening and blurring are on the same button, but I have the sharpening tool selected right now. So let's say I want to sharpen my subject here a little bit, but then I want to go in and blur a different area. I want to click and hold on the button here, and select the blur tool. So let's say I want to kind of blur maybe some stuff over here that I don't think is quite as important. And just like any other brush tool, I can change the size or the hardness about it. Most brush related tools also have a strength up at the top here, and so you can change how strong it is. On the dodging and burning tools, that just shows up as exposure, but it's the same thing. It's how intense the brush is. So if you have it at 100%, it's going to use that brush tool to the full strength of it. It's going to be really dramatic. If you turn it down lower, like I have this one at 11%, it's going to do it a little more gradual. So we have our dodging and burning tools here. They're underneath each other as well. And the dodging and burning tools have to do with value or how bright or dark an area is. So the dodging tool lightens things. So let's say I want to lighten up my subject a little bit. I'm going to make the brush a little smaller. I can brush that on, and I only have it at 11%, so it's really gradual, and I can build up how much I want it to lighten. And if I hold that tool down, I can go to the burn tool. So if there's anywhere I want to darken, like it's really bright on this cleat here on the dock, so I'm going to just paint that on over the top. Maybe I want the brush a little smaller. Paint that on so it's not quite so bright. And you can also select what things it is adjusting. So that could be the shadows. So if there's something really dark that you want to lighten or darken, you can select shadows. Or highlights, if it's the really bright areas, or the midtones that are kind of in between. But right now it's on the midtones. So that's a dodging and burning. And our last tool is the text tool, or the type tool. So that tool, when you select it, you can just click anywhere that you want to put a text box. You can either click and drag and create a text box, or you can just click once. But either way, it will fill it in with Latin. That is just some filled text. But once you start typing, it just completely replaces that. So I'm going to say duck on a duck, or whatever you want to type in. And then up at the top here, it lets you change the typeface or the font type. It lets you change the size. It goes up to 72, but if you want it bigger, you can always highlight it and just type it in. So I've changed this to 200, size 200. I could always go up bigger if I wanted to. I can type in 300 and push enter. Oops, I need to select the type. And then say 300. That'll make it a little bigger. You can change the color. So you can select the hue or the color here. And then you can select the value or how dark that is over here. Let's say I want to do it really dark blue like that. Then it changes the color of the type or the text. And similar to the crop tool, you want to click either the checkbox if that's how you want it, the cancel button if you want to get rid of it, but I want to keep it, so I'm going to push the checkbox here. And then if I want to move this text here, if I decide I don't want it in the water, it kind of blends in, I want it down here where it'll stand out, you can go up to the move tool, that very top one, and you can move around the text. So I'm going to put it right there. And one thing to note about adding text is that if you add text, then over on your layers, it adds a new layer. It'll have a text layer that says whatever you type in the text box. And so whichever one is highlighted is what layer is selected. So when you have a layer selected, it will be doing anything you're editing, it will be doing it to that layer. And so if you add some text and then you want to go in and add any other type of tools, you want to make sure to go in and select the background layer, which is your image, so that you're not doing the effects and the tools and everything to the text. You want to be doing it to the background layer, which is your actual image. So then if I want to go in and let's say I want to sharpen something up some more, now it's in the background layer and I can make those changes to the image, not the text. So those are our main tools. So you want to experiment with any of these tools, try out different types of tools on different images, but you want to use at least 2 tools on each image that you edit, and we want to have 5 images edited. And that is how you use tools in Photoshop.